Hello everybody and welcome to another video, another part of the Maguuma jungle tour. I at first thought this was going to be one video, then I thought it was going to be 3 videos. Well, now I'm realizing it's probably going to be something like 4 videos. So the idea, if this is the first one you're tuning into, is we're looking at the Maguuma jungle in Guild Wars 1, as this is where the expansion in Guild Wars 2 upcoming is going to be set. So we can see all the cool things about quests that were going on here, the environs, and maybe get some hints at things we'll be exploring and seeing come back in Guild Wars 2 when Heart of Thorns drops. Last we left off, we had entered the jungle. We had found out that the White Mantle were sacrificing innocent villagers with particular magical aptitude they were calling the Chosen over a bloodstone. And now we've kind of sided with the Shining Blade, who are a guerrilla faction of Critons, currently existing within the jungle to strike back at the Critons. So the Shining Blade are down here, but we just killed Justicar Hablion because he was murdering people. And because we killed Justicar Hablion, unfortunately, the White Mantle are now very angry and they're sending huge amounts of forces into the jungle. Last video left off as we left from Quarrel Falls and came to this place here, Ventari's Refuge. Ventari being a centaur who chose peace and will ultimately become a huge part of the Sylvaris storyline and much of what they believe in. So today we're actually, instead of continuing with main story stuff, there was kind of a big branch you could do when you reach the Maguuma jungle. You could continue with the story and the fight, joining the Shining Blade, striking back against the White Mantle and the corrupt leaders in charge of Kryta right now, or you could go deeper into the jungle. Now, the Guild Wars 2 map, I'll throw up right now, actually kind of shows this specific area here as well. This is the Falls, and it was a place we could go to in Guild Wars 1, totally a side area, just side quests taking place there, and the ability to get some interesting loot. I'm going to be talking about those quests and those particular maps today. So let's head on out from Ventari's Refuge, and out here we will actually find 2 NPCs we can acquire quests from. Now, Deeproot's the main one I want to talk about. Councillor Vela, this guy will actually continue a bunch of the main story stuff. She says, well, Matt, I'm Councillor Vela. I'm sworn to bring down the White Mantle, as well as those who hide behind them and pull their strings. And of course, that would be the Mersat, those in charge of the White Mantle. We can say, you rebels disgust me, and he can try and explain himself a little bit. He says, the Shining Blade are freedom fighters. I know it's difficult to believe that the White Mantle are complicit in the murders of hundreds of Critons. One thing that might be kind of cool to put some context here is if we do this quest, I think, a helping hand. He says, I need you to speak with Ventari. He will not allow me into his refuge. It's a long story and I do not wish to discuss it now. I know that he prefers to remain neutral, but the White Mantle and their masters are a threat to all Tyrians. And consider this, that the White Mantle, the Mersat, sorry, could become a thing in Guild Wars 2 and again be a threat to all Tyrians, not just Critons and not just humans. This is no mere civil war. There's much more at stake here than most of us know, more than we'd believe, I imagine. Ventari and his jungle-dwelling friends can help us. And basically this quest goes on with the main story in Ventari, even though a huge fight's about to break out here, where Ventari still basically will not help and he chooses the peaceful way, which is kind of interesting. You know, the quest went into a lot of really cool things in the first game. So, one thing to consider, though, is the White Mantle know where all of the Shining Blade are. We don't know why, but the White Mantle seem to know about many of the Shining Blade bases in the jungle. Alright, let's speak to Deeproot then. This is the side quest stuff. He says, whispers in the earth have pointed to 2 White Mantle agents at work in the Reed Bog. They attempt to move through the area with stealth. I would like to know their purpose in coming here. See if you can find them and overhear their conversation. You may do what you like with them, but make sure you obtain some information from them about their plans. And you can say, yes, absolutely, I'll help them. So, that's what we're going to be doing. And this is actually going to, instead of taking us this way back towards Kryta, we're going to go deeper into the jungle to a place called the Reed Bog. We'll skip there now. Now, we're currently in Etin's Back. I already talked a little bit about Etin's Back before. You can enter from the Silverwood, which is where we came from. Then it's got 2 exits. One exit is Drytop, and Drytop is where you would go to continue the main story. And it's actually not directly overlapping with Drytop from GW1. Or you've got Reed Bog, and this is well and truly going to move us well off the Guild Wars 2 map. You know, that awesome thing that Shaman's got, which shows us the historical guide to Tyria, where we can see everything overlaid. That's really not going to be much use to us, as you can see here now, because we're just going further and further away from any remotely playable area in the game so far. It's kind of interesting, actually, on the GW1 wiki, this quest that we're doing, the players over there have described this quest as heading into the heart of the Maguuma jungle, and really that's what we're going to be looking at in this video, the deepest reaches of the Maguuma jungle. And of course, you know, most of the marketing for Heart of Thorns, they're constantly saying, oh, we're going to go into the heart of the Maguuma jungle, the heart of the Maguuma jungle. What lies in the heart of the Maguuma jungle? Well, we can see maybe a little bit of that just very shortly. So, not too far from the exit of Ventari's Refuge, we do find ourselves in the Reed Bog. This, again, is one of those very small maps that existed. This really is a little bit similar to a previous area we saw, which was Mamnoon Lagoon. And so this is kind of like what Mamnoon Lagoon would be if it was a bit more fetid. It's a small, square-shaped map, and it's got kind of two major paths which surround this big, deep depression. Now, because we're specifically doing this quest right now, we're going to be taking the right path, so you can see actually we've got our green starburst here. It's actually going to take us right near the exit of the Reed Bog, which is where we'll be able to spy on these White Mantle troops. So this is a little bit bigger actually than I'd say than Mamnoon Lagoon was, and obviously you don't get such good views because it's a lot more dense, there's a lot more foliage rolling around. But yeah, that's just the general idea. There's not very much to say about Reed Bog. In both of these two maps we're going to be exploring, there are always going to be collectors. Collectors were a big mechanic of the first game we don't see in the second, where you could trade trash items with various NPCs around, and they would give you like armor, so you didn't have to craft it for yourself, but it might be slightly weaker kind of thing. So it was not a mechanic people took particular attention to, but it had its uses. Here we find another Shining Blade camp. You can actually you can identify that it's a Shining Blade camp because of the flag here, just the Shining Blade symbol on it, and it looks like it's been destroyed. It looks like there's an old campfire. There's actually a pig hanging there, which is kind of cool. I actually have no idea whether there's any particular story here as to what happened, but once again, as we saw in the previous mission, the first one, the Wilds, we have more of these runestones here, kind of sitting around just out in the open, and I mentioned them a bit before. We got some kind of a wyvern-looking creature, some kind of a triangle, looks a bit like the Eye of Janthir, I suppose, in a grid shape. I don't know, the speculation can run pretty wild on the forum sometimes to do with these. But yeah, we find two more of them at an abandoned Shining Blade camp that has no real explanation as to what the hell was going on with it at all. But here we do find some White Mantle. And they speak. They say, wait, did you hear something? Maybe these guys destroyed this camp. This camp's destroyed whether you're doing the quest or not. He says, it's nothing, you jump at shadows. This place has us both on edge. Better safe than sorry. Our friend inside the Shining Blade does not inspire much confidence in me. Have you ever thought that perhaps he might be playing us false? Then let us be away before we're discovered. Now, you kind of get a choice at this point in the quest. Do you want to go kill them? You get nothing for killing them, so I'm just going to let them walk off. He says, no, of course not. One thing in the dialogue there that I quite like is where they say you're jumping at shadows. Now, the perspective you get in-game right now, it doesn't look very shadowy and murky. Hell, we've even got some vultures circling overhead this dead camp. But, you know, it's a nice thought to me that it really could be quite scary, quite creepy atmosphere. And even the idea of this map, you know, like the Reed Bog, this, like, deep, dense, murky bog. I'd like to see them play into that perhaps in one of the Heart of Thorns biomes. But yeah, so let's head back. Now they're going to ask us to go back to Etten's back. I'll be able to cut a whole bunch of the walking out. And we can return to our friend Deeproot and see what he has to say. He says, your eavesdropping has brought us valuable information. It would seem we have a traitor in our midst. Now, some of the quests before this already kind of suggest it, and this is kind of like where we hear even from the White Mantle. There is a traitor among the Shining Blade. Who among us would stoop so low as to betray his brothers and sisters? We shall remain silent on the matter for now. I must think on how to flush this traitor out. We get some skills. Oh, look, cool, interesting ways of getting skill acquisition. Why doesn't this exist in Guild 2? Okay, moving on. He gives us another quest, a follow-up quest, and this says, all this talk of traitors worries me, although I'm loath to do so, and this is where things get very interesting, guys. He says, it may be time to turn to alternate sources of information. Deep within the forest lives Dark Oak. He does not usually choose to show himself, but perhaps if our need is great, he will make his presence known. One of my scouts, named Melthorin, who is stationed in the Reed Bog, knows where to find him. We need someone to seek out Dark Oak and obtain his counsel. I wonder whether you can take the name Melthorin in GW2. I wonder if anyone's actually nicked that, because he could be a ghost or something in the expansion. Who knows? All right, will you undertake this task? We can say absolutely. We'll seek out Dark Oak. So, and this gives you a pretty cool skill as well. Savage Shot's pretty useful. So we're gonna seek out Dark Oak, and now if we open up our map, you'll see not only do we go to Reed Bog to speak to Melthorin, we're actually gonna go even deeper into the jungle to meet this mysterious thing. And this, again, Dark Oak, I think absolutely is very high on my list. Like, if I were to do a top 10 things that might appear in Heart of Thorns, he's probably on there. For me, I think. As long as the devs remember this quest. Okay, now you will see, just as you enter Reed Bog, Scout Melthorin has now appeared. You have a chat with him. He says, nobody knows the forest as well as the Shining Blade. If any of the White Mantle come here, they haven't got a prayer. So we can say, blood and smoke, how can we help you? He says, you wish to speak with Dark Oak? You're a braver man than I. When he deigns to show himself, he can be found to the southwest in the Falls. And so now we will actually be directed to another map. I'm going to skip us ahead back over to that camp we were at a second ago. And just in the distance, you'll see another portal off. So let's go do that. You'll also notice over there on the right, in an inaccessible area, we do find another Shining Blade camp. It doesn't look like anyone's up there, but that could just be the mechanics of the way the game works. Alright, so here we go, just past the camp. As you guys can see, over there you've got some kind of a portal in the distance. Portals, really, in GW2 look a lot better. They were just kind of a bit of a miss in the previous game. I don't know whether that's because they were trying to elaborate to players that they were portals, but they were still supposed to vaguely at least look like a part of the environment. Like, portals in GW2 are really weird things, right? Like, they don't look natural at all. They look like weird magical things that are never explained. In any case, so we can just run down here. Obviously, we did have another choice in this map. If we'd gone along there, if we'd taken the left path instead of the right, we would have seen like tons of spiders dropping at us in sort of the darker looking area. Some of those glow plants look really cool. I'd like to see some of those in the sequel too. But we'll come across here again in the dark biome. Like, oh, there's so much cool stuff they could do in the underground one. So here we go. We reach now the Falls. The Falls is a particularly famous map for Guild Wars 1 because this was one of the rare places that very unique loot could drop. There was an item called the Totem Axe. Totem Axes would be really awesome if we could get them back in Guild Wars 2, especially if they were dropped here. But essentially in the first game they had a system where you could have loot drop that was like perfect max stats with specific stuff on it that couldn't be salvaged or many of the traditional things done to them, but they were just really, really good, like, named bits of loot, and they would only drop from, like, very specific bosses or very specific areas. The Totem Axe was really, really good for farming because it had something on it that gave you longer enchantment durations. It was just something that, especially for when it was first added, was really unique and really, really cool, and it was a cool little way for ArenaNet to incentivize what is ultimately one of the most remote areas of Guild Wars 1 prophecies. Like, there was very little reason outside of these quests to ever come to this huge map before they added vanquishing and stuff like that. So that was one of the main reasons a lot of people like to come here. They'd form up and they'd start like a big farm where they'd begin at Ventari's Refuge. They'd run down here, they'd skip a bunch of the mobs, and they'd try and eventually get themselves a Totem Axe. And eventually they did add another loot drop as well, a fan of some kind, I believe, to this map eventually. But, so yeah, that's one thing. But there are a couple of lore things we can do also. If I open up my map now, you guys will see just not too far away from where we're supposed to be is the supposed Deep Root. Now, you should be wondering to yourselves, what is Deep Root right now? Like, is it a human that's here? Is it something else? Well, what do we already know is here in the jungle? That should give you some clue. Well, and we're pretty close here. You'll notice GW1 never actually had a day-night cycle, so this area is supposed to be dark. It will always be this kind of flavor, this kind of color. And as we move up here, you'll find a bunch of centaurs around. And there indeed is Dark Oak. So Dark Oak is actually a druid. Now, all the druids in the first game were made to look like ranger spirits. Now, the design of ranger spirits in Guild Wars 2 has changed, but essentially those have been oak hearts, and oak hearts in the first game look like living versions of the druids, and the druids look like ghostly versions, and then spirits for rangers are ghostly versions of oak hearts again, just the new design. It's kind of interesting, but we already know a little bit about the druids from these previous tour videos that I've talked about. So this will be one specific druid, once a Crichton ascended, if that term's really applicable, to become one with nature, shed his mortal bonds. So, what does he have to say to us? Looks like he has deigned to show himself. His intro dialogue already is quite interesting. Now, I want you guys to think about the Elder Dragons. This dialogue was definitely not written with the Elder Dragons in mind. They weren't conceived of for this franchise. However, there is nothing stopping ArenaNet going back, looking at this and seeing how closely it fits into their Elder Dragon story and actually calling back to it and giving it more meaning when Heart of Thorns drops. So, it says, darkness and light, good and evil, all are a part of nature. There is no regrowth without death, without decay. Such is a lesson that I can teach you, stripling. So, what I find interesting here is a big theme of the Maguuma jungle that they've set up now is this kind of cycle of it's been dying, and then it regrows, and then it dies, and then it regrows. And again, we got this kind of cyclical life and death and decay even. It was like one of the aspects, I believe, of Zaitan, right, that they said. So, kind of interesting, and I wonder whether they're looking back to this. We'll go on. Now, he specifically says, I sense no fear in your heart. That is good, for there is no reason to fear me. I am but an aspect of nature, just as decay and death are part of the natural cycle. I already know the question you wish to ask, and yes, I can consult certain powers to obtain an answer, though it may not be to your liking. The powers I would consult require sacrifices. If you wish me to consult with them, you must seek out the mighty centaur lord called Drogo Greatmane. Bring to me this centaur's heart, and you shall have the answers you seek. He's going to commune with some kind of power. We won't get any further elaboration on this, on what exactly he's doing. Now, what do we know? We know that the druids are humans who came to the jungle and found some way to sort of become spirits. Is he communicating with perhaps an elder dragon sleeping beneath the jungle in some weird way? Is he? Is that the kind... are we looking at him as some kind of weird form of Mordrum, even? It's curious. I wouldn't be so bold, but it does seem very interesting that they're talking about some greater power that he's communing with that they have as yet, never explained before. So we need to kill a centaur. That's going to be back in the Reed Bog. Then we need to return and do a whole bunch of other stuff, which I'm not going to bother. I'll just read you guys the future quest text as we explore deeper into the falls and check out some of the other cool little things that are available in this map. So, Drogo doesn't really have very much interesting to say. We just end up killing the poor guy. I wonder whether that's another Game of Thrones reference. By the way, Guild Wars 1, especially Prophecies, had a lot of references to GOT. But, so we end up killing that centaur. We take his heart back, and we consult once again with Dark Oak, who says... I would also say this response he gives is kind of one of those classic prophecies we used to do a lot of speculation about, but is clearly referencing the main plot of the game rather than anything deeper, but do have an open mind. So he says, "Let me look into the dark. I see a great beast, a great cat, a lion. This lion hungers. He is devouring the forest, the entire forest, nay, the entire world. A host of gleaming angels, no, not angels, but birds, carrion birds, bright and terrible as the sun accompany this lion. All falls before his hunger until naught is left but bitter ashes. That is all I see." So we totally have always understood this as being in reference to, you know, the Crichtons, the White Mantle against the Shining Blade. The birds are supposed to be the Masarch, you know, these winged creatures. But I wonder whether, obviously this sounds very Elder Dragon-y too now as well, this great beast devouring the entire jungle. Really, we can still just say that he's speaking in metaphors about the generic prophecy story, which is probably what it's written about. But they could still elaborate on this more and add, you know, another angle to it, especially considering we know Dark Oak, himself a mystery, was communicating with some mysterious power. I really wouldn't be surprised to see this character return and be elaborated on once we get back to the falls in GW2. Now, of course, a new enemy that we have been seeing here, I haven't really talked about too much, are the jungle trolls. And we've seen a little bit of jungle trolls. The design obviously changed in Guild Wars 2, but they were all over the place in some of these deeper areas of the jungle. And I don't know, I think it'd be curious if we saw some more varieties of troll when we get Heart of Thorns. And even if they have like another version of like jungle troll, that would be pretty cool. Okay, now as we crest this hill on the left, you guys will find something pretty interesting. This is one of the biggest landmarks of the falls, widely speculated to be the start of the Heart of Thorns trailer. I'll throw that up on screen for you guys now, where Ritlock seems to be walking through some mysterious structure. This, buried way deep out here in the jungle, where really we've seen very little human presence at all, is a big structure. Now, this is a temple to the human god Balthazar. This is the only other example of a statue to a human god in the entire jungle outside of that one we saw in the very first video of this tour, except this one's way more grand. It's also far more overgrown with vines and has this weird kind of meshy stuff on the inside as well. So this is the statue. You do get to read his scriptures just as you would any other. There's no mobs that appear in here. There's no quest that's associated with here. This dialogue even is just generic stuff we see on all of his statues. Why is this a thing? It's very, very curious. Actually, can we kneel and summon the avatar of Balthazar at this one? We might not even have favour. Yes, we can. And you can speak to the champion of Balthazar, who will give you the buff if you want. So Balthazar is the champion of many causes. None of this stuff's really unique, though, so we can get ourselves a bit of morale. And Conquest gives you, what is this? 25 maximum health and plus 3 of a health regeneration. Very, very cool. So, yeah, this is the temple to Balthazar. It looked kind of like in the sequel. If Ritlock indeed was here, he burned his way through and found this was actually the gateway to one of those big, like the Golden City, perhaps, or any of those giant locations we've been seeing. But obviously none of that is confirmed. So this is a big place, and this was known to exist out here in the falls, very, very deep in the jungle, far away from where we could have been in Guild Wars 1's time. The only other NPC nearby is a collector, and they don't have any dialogue at all. They just say, "I'm looking for this, and I will give you this," which was always very boring for prophecies. That's not it for the falls, though. We will continue to travel along and see the falls themselves, where the area gets their name from. As we run there, actually, on the topic of the Balthazar temple out there, a lot of people have been speculating maybe ArenaNet will add some raid-style system to GW2, that they might overhaul the way they're dealing with endgame. Now, one of the biggest, most difficult, challenging kind of raid-style things in GW1 was a place called the Fissure of Woe. How did we access the Fissure of Woe? Through kneeling at a statue of Balthazar and speaking to Balthazar's champion. So maybe, is it a coincidence that we're going to the Maguuma jungle where there's going to be one of these things? Are we going to get the Fissure of Woe back in GW2 as the first real raid place? Obsidian armor returning at some point? That would be pretty cool. I would think that probably if that was really going to be a part of the expansion, they would already have announced it. But there could be space for them to add it just after the X-Pack drops. Who knows? So eventually, as you'll see from this walk, you do break out into areas that have got a lot of water. If we were to walk into this water here, for example, more Wind Riders, we would find again the buff that empowers us and gives us a little bit more health regeneration. But as we go even deeper, eventually we're going to find these beautiful waterfalls. Now, on the route, we'll find plenty of root behemoths. These are the things that can drop the totem axe for us. These are also the things we saw on the trailer that I mentioned before. It seems like in the sequel, they're kind of there again, but they move now, and they're not, like, grounded in the floor any longer. In these northern areas, they're mostly all that you're going to be finding. I was always very curious when I used to play this game of the idea that they might expand the map somehow, and that this was originally intended to have an outpost on the edge of it or something that was ultimately never implemented, because you can kind of walk around and you can see where roads seem to just end in dead ends at cliffs. But otherwise, yeah, you would just run around here, and the only reason really you'd want to come is to kill these things for that item that eventually became kind of undervalued because you could get it in other methods through other means elsewhere in the game. But here, at long last, because this is a pretty huge map, among tons and tons of Wind Riders, we will find the falls themselves. So there's the waterfalls. As soon as these things are dead, I'll show you guys. Now, this is a really interesting place for a few reasons. It used to just be that this was a cool place you could come and look at, and that was it. You had this collector here. Again, a collector with no extra dialogue. Hello, I've been collecting these jewels. I have nothing. Can you please give me some? But eventually they did end up adding this thing here, this actual thing you can click that says the falls. And they describe it as water cascades over the rocks into a pool so deep you cannot see the bottom. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? Now, they did eventually, though, add a new quest after a lot of other stuff was released, where we met an Asura named Zin, who had created a bunch of very powerful golems. Now, Zin's lab, the place from which he built his golems, was here at the falls. The whole quest chain was kind of an interesting scavenger hunt, and it ended basically with a shot of the falls, this place here. So the players that knew where that was, they would come here. Then when you had that quest complete, you could actually interact with this and you could go into his secret lab. So Zid was actually a pretty cool character. It was through this quest we got one of the most prominent heroes in the game, a hero named MOX, a hero like Ogden's Stone Healer, who could in theory still be alive and still exist. And so therefore, perhaps I speculate that when we get back to the falls in Guild Wars 2, can we enter Zin's secret lab beneath the waterfalls once again? And maybe will we find MOX came here and like powered himself off for a while, then we can power him back on, and maybe there'll be some kind of story to do with him in GW2. I think that'd be pretty amazing. Zin himself too, after those events with the golems, he actually went off with Livia and another Asura named Blim. Blim you might have heard of as a Guild Wars 2 player because he became a very renowned golemancer. Blim, Zin and Livia together basically created some technology using seers to fight against the Masat. The Masat, who are, what do you know, going to be a part of the expansion very likely. So it all seems to fit together, right? There could be some vague story where we meet MOX again, and MOX still has some of that technology we saw created in the Warring Kryter, and that will somehow tie all in together with the Masat in this storyline, the Exalted. Who knows? But a lot of that's going to be centered around the Falls, a place also widely speculated to be somehow the densest part of the jungle, and perhaps where deep underground Morgemoth is waiting. So that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. That's a look at Dark Oak. That's a look at the deepest reaches of the jungle, the falls, the Reed Bog. And next time we'll finish up this tour by continuing the main story once again and figuring out how this all ended, as well as what's going on at the Henge of Den Rally. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I guess I'll see you for that one.